Today's guest on CyberSense CISO Insights is Joshua Payne. Joshua has led technology operations at Stars Hospital, overseeing the development of critical building and medical systems, and previously served as the head of technology for Australia and New Zealand at Home Instead. As a thought leader, Josh writes articles to raise cybersecurity awareness and recently led the development of Infotrust's public response to the Australian Government Department of Home Affairs consultation for Horizon 2 of the 2023 to 2030 Australian Cybersecurity Strategy. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to sit down with Josh and get his thoughts on some of the key issues in our industry, and trust that you'll enjoy this episode of CyberSense CISO Insights. Josh, welcome to CyberSense CISO Insights. Happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Thank you. You too. I think week one is event logging.
Yes, and I think you wrote an article about event logging.
I did. Good spotting on that. There was a couple more articles coming, so watch the space.
Yeah, excellent.
I think as a whole, compliance in itself is, some will call it a necessary evil. People also talk about the carrot and the stick approach to anything in life, not just the compliance, cybersecurity. HR do the same thing, and I think, as I mentioned, compliance is that that necessary evil. I think it's great to have it, and it is at times fortunate or easy to be able to just point at the rule and say that the control says X, Y, Z, and therefore we must do it, and bring out that stick. And I think a lot of IT and cyber professionals will often just default to that. And I think it has its place, because some organizations, some executives that you speak to, all they want to do is meet the bare minimum to have the most revenue for the customer, for the organization. And having that absolute minimum benchmark can be really powerful in helping the entire industry uplift. Equally, it's only one part of GRC. It's the C on the end. And to your question around how do you show the value of it, I'd probably argue and say I don't try to show the value in the compliance piece, because the compliance piece is that stick that I mentioned before, and instead I talk about the risk piece. So at the end of the day, and it's one thing that people hear me probably say far too often. It's that most businesses out there, excluding the IT businesses, that we work for, they don't run to do cybersecurity or to run IT. That's just not their inherent goal. That's not their strategy. Their strategy is to deliver a service or a product to market, and ultimately make money for most businesses, not-for-profits, and government excluded. So if the business is not there to run IT, it really comes back to risk. It's what is the risk of doing something and what's the risk of not doing it, and providing that level of awareness to the executives, to the board members that are making that decision, so that they can make the decision that they feel is right for the organization. And what I find that does is it takes security from being those no people that we're all used to having. Security, can I install this? No. Can I have this? No, it's too risky. To absolutely, we can do just about anything that you need, as long as we've got the budget for it from the executive team. And if they see the value in it, that budget will follow. But it turns out, it pushes that risk up and allows them to make their own risk-informed decisions.
Mm. There's just so much to unpack in everything that you just said. Um, Compliance is, I think not a goal unto itself, right? Like, especially when you talk about, clients wanting to market their services and needing to be compliant with things like ISO 27001. Like sometimes compliance is treated like a tick box exercise. And especially, when we live in a world where, you know, suppliers won't be taken seriously or cannot be, entering into contracts if they haven't ticked the box of being ISO compliant or SMB compliant. But then sometimes you're dealing with people who don't, are necessarily experts in cybersecurity or don't care about cybersecurity because it's not part of their core business, but they still want the tick because without the tick, they can't trade or they can't bid. Do you see compliance being treated like a tick box exercise in your experience, and what would you say about how we should think about compliance?
I certainly have seen a lot of businesses and a lot of people treat it as a tick box exercise because it's easy to do so. We're going through the third-party risks questionnaires. Does the supplier have ISO 27001 certification? Yes, fantastic. Tick the box and move on. Rarely do I see clients initially even ask what the scope of that ISO 27001 certification is, which is a whole nother kettle of fish that we could talk for hours about. And it's challenging. Like I mentioned before, it's easy for people just to aim for the the lowest mark, just hit that tick box and move on. But really, where I see that value is it's changing that conversation from compliance to risk. Because as cybersecurity professionals, we see the risk that's out there. It's very easy for us to see. We're exposed in it every day. A lot of the executives that we talk to and engage, they haven't been exposed to that for years. Cybersecurity is only a newer term that's hitting the board level in recent years, and ultimately, they may not be professionals in it because that's why they're having a conversation with us. So it's changing that conversation to be that risk based, and I always equate it back to my experience at the hospital. And I'll always try to use the term that works best with my stakeholders. So the term that I started using a lot more when I was working at the hospital was informed consent. So in the medical field, before you go in for a surgery, an operation, anything to that effect, and at a high level, I'm paraphrasing here, so please take it with a pinch of salt. The clinician has to explain something to you, your procedure, in a simple enough term for you to be able to understand, and therefore provide informed consent. So not just consent to say, yes, I am okay to do the surgery, but be informed at least enough about what is going to happen and what's involved for you to make that informed consent decision. And that's very much the same way as I see cybersecurity and talking to the boards. So again, it's taking it from, has that surgeon explained something? Yes, tick box. To, have they actually articulated it in a way that the patient can understand so that the patient can make a safe decision? Yes, that's that risk piece. So have we spoken to the executives in a way that they were able to understand and make their own decision on that risk, so that we aren't the no people, we're the enablers and the providers of information. The simple answer is it depends. It depends on the board. It depends on and on the company. Like you've probably noticed, I like to use colloquialisms or references that they best understand. Medical field, it's, try to use something along those lines. Networks become the circulatory system of the body. Servers and infrastructure, the brain and the different organs. So where possible, relate it back to a field, that they best understand. But equally, drop the technical jargon. It's great for it's common, I should probably say more, in the cyber field to use technical jargon, to use acronyms, and just say, well, because we say so and because we know better. But it's dropping that technical jargon. It's making it simple, making it simpler to understand. And ultimately, one of the common things I'll do is ask the question: have I explained that properly? Does what I said, has what I've said actually made sense? Because if not, I need to now take it upon myself to re-explain it, to come back, to do some more research, to my previous point, to be able to provide that informed judgment piece, so that they can provide their consent or their direction on what they would like to do for the business. It's really scenario dependent, I think. I think in a perfect world, quantitative is fantastic. It's numbers on paper. It's perfect. Couldn't go wrong. However, what I've found to be the case with that is that it can be too scary, too hard to get to a quantitative number, and because of that, risks sometimes don't get raised, because the person who wants he goes to raise it is unsure of what that whole process looks like. They can articulate it, of what it feels like, or what they can see the outcome as, but they can't necessarily justify that, in numbers. But they still have an understanding of it. An example, and again, going back to analogies, when we drive down the road, there is risk all around. Every moment we are driving, every decision we're making, we're undertaking a dynamic risk assessment within ourselves. Do we hit the brakes? Do we apply a little bit more accelerator? Do we, move the car a couple centimeters to the left or to the right to avoid a pothole, etc.? We don't have to know what the exact dollar figure is, that pothole worth of damage that pothole could do to the car. But we know our appetite for pothole damage to the car will likely be exceeded if we hit that pothole. So it really depends on the situation. Whereas for more regulated environments that require absolute perfect or as near to perfect uptime as possible, generally what I've found is that a number can be applied to those instances, either in minutes, seconds, hours worth of downtime, or worth of clients impacted, or a formula within. So doing business cases on the back of risk being identified, quantitative works quite well in that sense. So I'd say I wouldn't say there's a hard and fast answer. I think it really depends on the scenario and how perfect, for lack of a better term, or how accurate that assessment needs to be. And I'll probably pose both an analogy and a question. My first question on GRC in a box, those sorts of compliance tools, is what's the outcome that the organization is trying to achieve with the tool? Are they trying to achieve a report and a tick box, to use the earlier term? Or are they genuinely trying to understand the effectiveness of their controls, how they're running, and risks that might not be preloaded into those tools, or that might come from that qualitative human in the loop? So it depends what the organization's outcome is. And the analogy or the reference I would probably use for that is, and you probably can't see it in my slightly blurred background, is my hobby from teenage years has been flying and aviation. Autopilot has been functioning for decades, able to fly the plane from point A to point B, and in some cases, landed down onto the runway. We now have autonomous aircraft that can take themselves off and land themselves, just about gate to gate. But yet we still have these humans in the loop. Because ultimately, automation is fantastic. It's an amazing enabler. However, I see it more as a force multiplier than a force replacement. So same thing that in the aircraft, it takes that load away from the pilot to have more cognitive space for more critical decisions, or decisions that aren't necessarily loaded into these computer systems, to be able to feel the plane move through the turbulence rather than just rely on a sensor to input that data. And therefore, that pilot has better decisions they can make. They've got more time, more capacity to think about it, whilst the plane does the easy thing of keeping it straight, leveled, and pointed in the right direction as an oversimplification. So coming back to the GRC, those GRC tools, they can absolutely be a force multiplier. They can take away a lot of the effort required for GRC professionals to check for updates to compliance pieces, to go and check for if a control has changed in the background. Take a cloud control as an example, or cloud configuration. It can speed up that process and reduce the effort that they require to allow them more time to have discussions with stakeholders and ask the questions of, what keeps you up at night? Does anything keep you up at night? And if so, and if it's not in the risk register, let's talk about that, because there shouldn't be anything that has to keep you up at night that's not on paper as a decision to be made. I think there's a lot of common risks that everyone discusses. Supply chain is a big one that's coming up. Especially as you mentioned, kind of small organizations. I think a big one for me that's not really spoken about a lot, and it always sits in the back of my mind. I wouldn't go so much to say as it keeps me up at night just yet, but we'll see. Is around, I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate it. It's assumptions that are sometimes made on reliability of services. Take it as an example, and it's very recent, and there isn't a full root cause analysis on it yet. So I'm certainly not getting into the nitty gritty of why something occurred. But take the Optus outage with 000. When we think about critical infrastructure in layman terms, without our cybersecurity hats on, it's easy to think of it as this impenetrable, fortress that cannot be downed because it will just always work. And I think it's very easy to make that assumption and not necessarily see behind the scenes until something catastrophic does occur. I think that's probably one of the biggest risks. Extrapolating that out and saying assumptions that get made, and that does then touch on supply chain. A lot of businesses assume that the contract will cover them for downtime, or the contract will say and specify a level of security and privacy and recourse for failure to deliver on that. But often what we're finding is that these assumptions that are getting made, these trust exercises that are occurring, are seeming to show cracks in previously impenetrable pieces of infrastructure. Absolutely, I think there is a shared level of responsibility there. But I do think there is a line. I'm not and I don't necessarily know exactly where that would be drawn around critical infrastructure versus business infrastructure. So to your point, businesses doing their risk assessments and only having one provider, one service, and if that was outside of their appetite, then that's something that has potentially fallen through the cracks. But equally, on the other side, when you talk about critical infrastructure and triple zero services in this case, or think healthcare, GPS, back to your original comment, at what point do we draw the line if we've made some assumptions of the ongoing reliability of those services? And this is probably the auditor coming out of me, what assurance is there from external entities of those services being, of how those services are being run and can continue to run on a zero fail basis, or as close to as possible?
Yeah.
I think one of the big pieces that I've seen personally is that through that entire hierarchy, regardless of how many levels it is, from your most junior employee all the way up to the executives, it's ensuring that there is that freedom and clarity on how to raise that risk, to make sure that it does flow all the way up to that into the enterprise risk register if it is a high enough risk. So again, going back to aviation, I started flying in gliders when I was 14 or so. So quite young, and quite scary to think back that a 14-year-old was flying gliders. But the one important thing that each and every one of us were taught out on the flight line is, no matter who is there, anyone has the right to stop an aircraft launch. And at any point in time, someone could raise the alarm, stand up, shout, whatever they need to do to stop that aircraft launch. And the first response to that is whoever, in each critical piece of that puzzle, the pilot of the tug aircraft, the pilot of the glider, etc., is to abort that takeoff and ask the questions afterwards. It's to make that situation safe based on the best information they have, which is someone, screaming to stop this, to stop the situation, to stop the launch, and then figure it out afterwards and have a no-fault system. Because at the end of the day, no one wants an accident to happen. So it's allowing and empowering everyone to raise that risk. So same thing in the organization. When you have taking a hospital as an example, you have executives sitting in the offices that rarely will want to venture out into some of the more operational technology areas of the building, because they're less air conditioned, noisy, dirty, and really, they don't need to be there. But if someone who does go into those areas quite a lot and is knowledgeable, or has enough awareness to know when something looks out of place, you surely want that person to raise that risk and be able to have a clear no-fault mechanism to do so that even if it turns out to be nothing, there is no penalty for them. It's a thank you so much for raising what you thought was going to be a problem. Thankfully, this isn't. Please let us know next time. Always speak up and never stay quiet.
But thanks again for your time, and look forward to having you on CISO Insights again sometime in the future.
Excellent. Thank you for your time as well, Marcel. It was great to catch up with you. And definitely we'll keep in touch and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Awesome.